You know, I'm glad I look at things sometimes. Okay. There was no sound. The cable wasn't connected. Taishi, my bad. That was on me. You should be able to hear it now, right? Okay. Where was I? Anyway. Yeah, so I updated the Scheme demo. It's running 0.17 right now. Yeah, so I removed something from my audio chain. I do everything in hardware as much as I can because it's just easier to keep set up. But one of the hardware pieces failed because I've had it for years. So I got rid of it from the chain. But that means that I now have one cable to plug in if I want to record on my laptop versus put it into my PC. So my splitting isn't working anymore. And I forget. So yeah, it's a little bit of a pain to update if you're using a bunch of dependencies right now, because 0.17.0-rc.1 came out almost exactly a week ago. I think it was like almost exactly a week ago. So most things have not updated. Things that I own, I've updated. So like Bevy Scheme is up to date. Bevy obviously has the release, but like Avian currently is not up to date. So I have a branch that branches off of the 0.17 PR that fixes a couple things so that I can up to date. But unfortunately, what that means is because I'm using Avian and because I use other things as well, is that I need to patch Bevy to use the local version. And patching Bevy is kind of a pain. This is kind of the full list of stuff that you need to patch if you're going to patch Bevy for third-party crates that aren't coming from crates.io, etc. So it's a little bit of a pain. But it is working. I think Bevy Enhanced Input might have a 0.17 PR in progress. Give me this. Bevy Enhanced Input. So there's a start migrating PR. I don't think this is ready. I think they're stuck on some pointer issues. That's from 2 days ago, so it doesn't seem terribly hard to fix, but somebody needs to find the time to do it. So overall, we don't have Bevy Enhanced Input. We 0.17 for Avian is this branch. There's one issue with that branch. So I have this PR up for that branch. A very small diff from like the 0.17 work for Avian that John Dolph is doing and this little fix. So don't have to trust this PR all that much. It's just a temporary fix. Like, I don't mean like a temporary fix as in like it's temporary. I mean like a temporaries fix. Like this was passing in some references and the temporaries didn't live long enough. What else are we using? I don't think we're using much yet. I want to put Bevy Seedling in here. Bevy Seedling has a branch. Bevy Seedling. I think they're going to get a release out later today. Branch, but no PR. I don't know which one the branch is, actually. I know people are using a branch. The other thing is Firewheel also needs a release for Bevy Seedling. But that'll be very fun. But in the meantime, we are up to date on 0.17 for this demo that I'm building. We need to wait for 0.17.rc.2 for a couple fixes. One of them specifically, I have this pattern where We build stuff in Blender. It comes into Bevy. When it comes into Bevy, a component gets added. So, for example, when a terrain material component, terrain mat, gets added to an entity, this component hook runs. We get a resource to look for a terrain handle that we've already created. So this is a material handle. We remove the standard material that got created from the GLTF stuff, and we insert that handle so that everything that comes in gets the same handle for this material, because we don't really need different handles. This pattern conflicted with some of the type erased material work, in that between the original standard material getting inserted and us removing this, the rendering world kind of like got some data and then lost some data, so it panicked. That has since been fixed. That's in a 0.17.0-rc.1 that will come out at some point. One thing that we do get to do is, where is this? I have this really awful system here that is like checking for any texture that is an R16 uint and changing it to an R16 unorm. But I believe, so if we comment this out, the application will panic. Because basically what's happening here, or I guess it won't panic, but it'll throw a shader error, and we won't see anything on screen. So what's happening here is that we have an image that's coming in as R16 uint. So that is the red channel 16-bit unsigned integer, 0 to 65,355 or whatever the number is. I can never remember the number. When that gets into a shader, we want that to be a number from 0 to 1, right? So texture formats let us say, hey, we have R16 uint data, but we want to treat that as 0 to 1 inside of the shader. So it'll do that transition for us. Unfortunately, where's our height? So this is depth, right? The error that we get is that uint, image sampler uint, does not match the required sampler's float. So this is like an array of required samplers or whatever. So our data is all fine, and if you don't understand this error message, it can be kind of weird. But really what's happening here is, I think this is going to be on settings, right? I can now just set this in the loader if I know what's happening here. This has got to be sum, doesn't it? Yeah. So this should fix that issue. Yeah. So now we can kind of like, if we know what data we're going to get from an image, if we've exported something from Substance Designer or whatnot, and we know what kind of data that's going to come in as, we can ahead of time specify the texture format and the way that that data will show up in the shader, such that something like the standard material depth map gets the data that it expects. And we didn't have to change the image or anything. Like, it's all red channel, 16-bit, unsigned integer, 0, values from 0 to 65,000 or whatever. But, like, WGPU will take care of transitioning that from that range to 0 to 1 for us in the shader, which is really nice. What else do we have going on here? I guess this can go down there now. I guess we don't need repeat on all of these, but that's fine. It's just one really large descriptor. Why does this have an error? Expected function struct var let const alias or override, but found brace left. Oh, that's not in the shader. Never mind. Hang on. Get rid of the WGSL. Proc macro error. Oh, that's because... Okay, let's see if we can restart the server. I upgraded from like Rust 1.88. I skipped 1.89 to 1.90. Rust 1.90 is out. It's pretty cool. But that means that my cargo target directory is built by 1.90 and Rust Analyzer is using 1.88, and they didn't conflict. Like the ABI doesn't match between those two versions. This is the other big change for 0.17 for shaders. So every shader that uses like this material bind group, which used to be 2, has changed to be a different number, but potentially only temporarily. So this group, like shader def here, that defines this number, is meant so that in the future, if this number ever needs to change again, that everybody doesn't break and it can just change, and Bevy's rendering team can change it to whatever they need it to be. So this shader def here is basically just the number 2, or 3, I guess, right now. Let's see what else. Camera. Zoom this out a little bit. Of course, I have a bunch of warnings because I have a bunch of patches that aren't being used and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot to do with this demo. I think that one of the things I need to do is create an actual texture. Oh, actually, you know what? One of these things needs a fix. Let's get that camera back zoomed in. That's why I had it zoomed in. Wait, do I not get my... Oh no. Do I not get my, like, D full screen buttons? Oh well. That's weird. I upgraded Mac OS. So stuff changed. Let's double this again. Let's do actually like, I don't know, something a little higher. Not too much higher, but a little bit higher. So I'm basically just zooming in the orthographic projection so that I can see the texture a little bit better. Because we've got a UV transform issue effectively. So this, can we get, let's see, features, Bevy file watcher, let's do that. And then in terrain, we've got this UV transform. 0.17 changes where we can get this from, which is great. I think we can get that from the PBR input. But we did change this to be the world position mod 1 for the UV coordinate. And our base texture sample, I think, is smaller than the sample for the height, which means that this height sample, which uses in.a, why does it use in.a? I think it shouldn't be using in.a. I think it should be using in.uv. We need the world position there, so maybe that'll be a little bit more involved of a fix than I thought it was. We've got this triplanar function down here. It takes the vertex output, which is probably a little bit more than it needs to take in terms of like input data, because this is only used for the world position and the normal in this case. We take some texture and some sampler for that texture, and we basically take our 3 samples from each of these locations with our little mod going on here like we're doing in the other one, and then we combine those to determine like what it should actually look like on a cube or something like that, depending on the normals. So trip is basically just, I should not name this checkers anymore. I don't know, I should name that. We'll name that something else some other time. That's this function here. So the interesting thing is that is not the way that the PBR input is doing its sample for the color. So I think actually what we have to do in this shader at some point is replace the sampling that's happening for the base color with this. And I think if I let this finish building and then show the side, I think we'll see that that is true. Because we should be seeing some streaks from the base texture. So the standard material extension is getting us some stuff still. We still have like all the light sampling and stuff. Let's see if we can get this color to show up. Yeah, okay. See these streaks on the left? All of those streaks are because the texture that we're seeing on the top, that is not the sand. It's technically dirt, but it looks like sand to me. The texture on the top, that might be a little bit hard to see, is only being sampled in like the typical UV coordinate sampling, modified by the UV transform. So the only thing that we're getting here is like the Y normal texture sample, which means that if you get to the edge here, you can see that for the sand, it comes along the side and like correctly samples in the right way. But for the base color or the base color texture, what it's doing is taking whatever pixel is true here and just you get that color the entire vertical. When am I going to start making normal videos again? What do you mean by normal videos? What was the last video? Just uploads? Very soon. But this week in Bevy stuff, I'm trying to catch up on this weekend. Basically, the TLDR is the stuff that I do to fund the work on this week in Bevy is a combination of Rust Adventure and client work. So, first, Rust Adventure. You can use your corporate education budget to pay for a subscription to this. And this goes directly into all of the stuff that I make on YouTube and the stuff that I make on this platform. And you can take your, corporate education budget, which people probably usually haven't used by this point in the year, and pay for that subscription. And the other thing I do to fund this work is client work. So I take clients and I do either IC work for them, I do either like consulting work for them, or I do like content development work for them. And right now I'm doing content development work for a client, which means that I am doing a lot of writing, like a lot of writing. I'm doing a lot of writing for them. And then the This Week in Bevy stuff takes like a day worth of work a week. And then I'm also still doing all the other stuff. And then Bevy's RC is coming out and I have to upgrade all my other software. And I wanted to get like an update to my personal site out. So I did that, but that meant that, I needed to like cut back on something else. So this is out now. et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, you don't need the whole spiel, but TLDR, uploads should be happening pretty soon. Why did I have this open? I could make that GLTF post a video too. I wasn't sure if I should. So nope, that's not what I meant to search. I could do something on Bevy's birthday as a video. There's a bunch of posts. This isn't the right one to look at. Community reflections. So there's the Bevy birthday post, and then there's community reflections. And somebody, Rin actually, she asked me to like do something with all of these and make a video about it. I don't know exactly what video to make about that. I know that I don't want to just like put words in other people's mouths. So yeah, I need to think about it a little bit before I make this video. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff. Like obviously Cart is project lead, Tychadelia Charlotte is SME rendering, Rain is working on editor stuff, Fallible Things as always, even in this chat hanging out, but also doing stuff in Bevy and stuff. Dreamer Talon or Viridia is doing Bevy UI stuff. JMS55 is Solari and Meshlets. I think, no, we're calling it Virtual Geometry. Sorry, don't call it Meshlets. It's Virtual Geometry. Mr. Shanty is doing Beat and some other stuff, etc., etc. And then you've got like content on working groups, linter and CLI stuff. I didn't read Doomy's post yet. Game Jam stuff. What's difficult with Bevy? Bevy audio future. Contributing still feels daunting. Oh, this is something that I could like do some content about. Charlotte is like SME rendering for Bevy, but also part of the Nanu team. Nanu has been rewriting. I love these links. I absolutely love these links. Nanu is being rebuilt on Bevy plugins, which is really interesting. I think they're gonna get a release out probably for 0.18 or something like that. I don't know. Don't commit someone else to doing stuff, you know. But they do have like code that works and has worked for quite a while. So the Nanu stuff is in, as far as I can tell, a good place. Miles has talked about the working group stuff. The working group stuff is really interesting from the perspective of like previously Bevy had like an RFC process, and then it switched to this idea of like working groups. And working groups have been going pretty well, actually. They're kind of like a combination of like just a channel to bring people who are interested in a topic together, and an official declaration that something is being worked on, which I think works a lot better than RFCs. And this whole section on like everybody gets RFCs wrong talks a little bit about that and like what an RFC used to be and what it is now. But yeah, I don't know. There's a bunch of really cool stuff here. I have my own post here, obviously. The Bevy components and GLTF stuff. I got asked about Skeen stuff, effectively. So Skeen, if anybody that's watching is unaware, is like a Bevy and Blender integration. So it's an add-on and a Rust crate. And the way that it works is it takes Bevy's reflection information, so data about the components that you're going to create and use and whatever in your Bevy application. takes those into Blender, builds some UI, lets you stuff that stuff in GLTF via the extras field, send it back to Bevy. It gets instantiated when you spawn scenes and stuff. So this post is all about the Bevy and Rust side of things. It's about the format that Skeen uses, whether it makes sense to do in extensions or in extras, what the data looks like, how the serialization can actually work. Like where should we put stuff? What does it look like in an actual like GLTF object? Challenges like relationship components. I don't have a RON formatter. I wonder what a RON formatter, or not a formatter, highlighter on my site. I don't know what a RON highlighter would look like. Talk about like details like IDs and stuff and what relationships mean. If we can better support like arbitrary GLTF extensions in Bevy or not. And then like Skeen and the format specifically works well with other editors. So people use Trench Broom. I should make Trench Broom a link. But Trench Broom is like an alternative to what you would do in Blender to some extent. It's a much more limited version of like a level editor. But all the data that you stick in GLTF stuff that you can then take into Trench Broom and place in the world, all of that flows through via that format that I was talking about. And when you load like a Trench Broom map, then all of the stuff that references the GLTF in that document, that's all passed through and it just works. So when you load in that GLTF stuff, all the components and stuff just get plopped in there. So I could do that. It's nice to have a place to put writing again. So probably what I'll end up doing in the like medium term is putting more stuff on the site, turning that stuff into videos as I write it on the site, which is what I used to do. At some point I started just making the videos. Hey Xavier, how's it going? How's your, I guess, is it morning for you? I don't remember the time zone difference. I know where you are, but I don't actually know the time zones that well. Avian. What about Avian? Like a video on Avian? Is that what you were saying? I think one of the things I want to do is like update some of the demos and stuff. Your message above about tutorials, not just live, sure. What do you... Noon and change. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's what probably something like I would have guessed. I might have guessed like 11, but I don't think I saw the tutorial message. Let me see. Or are you just talking about like the normal videos comment? Let's do... What is the next one that I want to update? I think 2048 probably is a good one. So I think we're going to do some 0.17 updates today. Avian is an interesting one. Avian is... How do I frame this? There's a lot of videos you can make on Avian. One of the ones that I want to do the most is a series that like walks through GJK and stuff. And does like a build-up of like what is Avian, what does collision look like actually, Like what is avian actually doing, and giving people an intuition for that. So GJK and some other stuff. John Dolph has a really great message in Discord that is effectively like, if you wanted to get into physics, what should you start with and what should you do? And I wanted to take some of that and merge that into this other idea and like make avian content. But on the other end, a lot of people don't care about what it's built as. They don't care about like what it is from that perspective. They just want to know how to use it. So like you're saying, direct tutorials for it are another thing. I guess one of the things that I have trouble with at some point is, I know too much, in a sense. Not that I'm like the most knowledgeable, but what I mean more is like, if I was going to make a video, I think the first video on avian that I would make would be like, what is a rigid body and how do you work with colliders, I guess, like cover the API. Which somewhat in the back of my head starts to feel a little bit like this is like page 1 of the README, right? Spawn a rigid body and a collider. But I guess like at this point, you don't know like what a sensor is. You don't know about transform, interpolation, and abstraction. I think that how do I frame this? I think that I would want use cases for avian to do like user videos. That would be great. The docs are good, but to fully understand how to use collisions, it took you several hours. Interesting. So like how to do like on collision start, like deal with the events and understand. Okay, mental model for. Let me write that down. Mental model for like collisions and well, that's not supposed to be there. That's my database. Let's see. Avian mental model. Like, what are collisions? Or like how to use collisions. On collision start. Sensors. Sensors is I think there's a couple of use cases that could fall out of that, right? Like somebody was asking about pressure plates the other day. I think using it, one of the things that I want to use it for actually, I don't know if I'm going to use it for this, but it's possible that you could use it for like audio sensors. Like basically in Blender, have a cube, like an empty, put it in an area, and when you enter that area, have a certain track playing. Or like transition between two tracks. Hang on, I need to go back half a sentence. You'll make a tutorial when you're done with your games demo. Kid's doing a whirlwind rush through the API right now. Sweet, that's awesome. Also, welcome to the stream. I think anybody making more content about like how to use things and how physics works and game development in general is good. Even if like, my opinion is, even if like me and 3 other people make the same tutorial for the same topic, that will come out with 4 different tutorials for 4 different audiences that work for 4 different like people, if that makes sense. So I'm always happy to see more. And I would heavily encourage you to do that. The difference between physics objects colliding and sensing objects. Difference between observer events and message reader. I see you're using the new terminology, you 0.17 person. Deciding what the right way to handle are. You're dabbling in writing a raycast vehicle for Avian. Not greatly successful. A tutorial from you on what to do in each schedule or sub-step would be cool. For a vehicle... Yeah, because that's one of the things that probably should stick into a video. The camera. Jan has actually written a lot of like examples and stuff in I can never remember the name of it. It's not Firefox, it's I can never remember the name. Anyway, he has a 3D project template, but the camera movement relative to physics is pretty important, because it's kind of like separate the rotation and translation, and if something impacts the direction in which you're moving, so like if the camera like rotation affects which direction forward is going to be, then you do the rotation before the physics, you do the physics, and then it moves you in that direction, and you do the translation. There's also that video. There's the one video everybody uses for building a vehicle controller. You've been also unable to get tri-mesh from mesh to work on even a basic cube. It just crashes Bevy. That sounds bad. It crashes Bevy. It sounds like it might not be on the right entity. But that's something I could do too. Like collider constructor. Collider constructor hierarchy. Maybe that like fits into a sub chapter of a different video, because there's not actually that much to talk about there. Yeah, it's super needed right now, especially in the Bevy ecosystem. Yeah, anything that you want to write about tutorials and stuff is fantastic. I think that's a great idea. Your brain works a certain kind of way and you don't see tutorials target that much, so the more the merrier. Absolutely, 100%. When you saw you renamed event reader to message reader, you're so happy. The current state of events being valid for both observers and readers was always a poor choice. Yeah, the change to prioritize like events being observers, I think, is a good change. Where's 0.17? I don't like that they... I don't know. I have to figure out like a new navigational pattern. Because like... what am I supposed to do to get to versions on a keyboard? So I have to use my mouse to click this. And once I use my mouse, they close the search. So now I have an extra button to click for search. I know you can hit slash on the keyboard, but like I feel like I'm bouncing between my keyboard and my mouse to navigate this site now. Anyway, what was I looking for? Not the tri-mesh stuff. Message event. So yeah, events are basically observers now. Entity events are basically like targeted observers. And then messages are batched events now, which I think is really great. You were following my tutorial on tri-mesh for a mesh with the GLTF extras? Dang. Clearly my tutorial was not good enough if you're not getting it. If you were following my tutorial on tri-mesh for mesh, the thing that I would say to check if it was crashing is the issue that most people tend to have is they put the extras on the object and not on the mesh. So make sure... I think I can just open Blender. I don't have Blender open at the moment, but of course it's going to open on my other monitor. So the thing that happens with the cube here, right, if you just go over here and you start dropping custom properties here, this is on the object. The orange thing is the object, right? So if you look at this cube, you've got an object, and then right below it, you've got a mesh. If you want to add a tri-mesh collider information to the cube, you have to go to data. You have to, not object, which is this orange thing. You have to go to this green thing, and that's where you have to put the custom property data. This is where it has to be. Because tri-mesh from mesh specifically, because of Avian's implementation, it has to be on the same entity as the mesh. The other option you have is to use collider constructor hierarchy, which has some different options, which you don't need to place on the mesh itself. But yeah, if it can't find a mesh to attach to, that means that you were probably putting it on object here and not on mesh, because these become two different entities. One becomes the parent, and one becomes the one with the mesh on it. Have I ever been to RustConf and consider going in the future? I gave a talk last year. I gave this talk. Actually, I gave one at Rust Nation UK last year too.
Our next speaker.
Websites, web apps, and WebAssembly. I like that talk. I might turn that into a video. I don't know. There's a big difference between being on stage and making it a video. But basically, that talk talks about like what Leptos is, and how we got here, and why Leptos is cool compared to like the state of UI development over the last 10 years. Oh, you were there last year? Nice. Yeah, I gave a talk last year. So yeah, I'm not going this year. Well, I guess I didn't go this year. It was last week, right? 2 weeks ago, something like that. I might go next year, depending on where it is. I am intending to go to Rust Week, which I also went to last year. I'll probably try to submit a talk to Rust Week. I don't know. I didn't submit a talk to Rust Week last year. I just went to like support. You think you'll go next year as well? Nice. Cool. Useful detour. Nope, don't use them. I mean, I have very strong opinions on the topic. I think that the TLDR of the opinions that I hold is that recent research shows that they make people think that they're 20% more productive, but they're actually 20% less productive. And I think that has panned out across everything that I've seen. With respect to that particular technology, there's a lot of people hyping it up quite a bit right now. A lot of people who are financially invested in this being the next big thing because they'll get rich off of it. But it doesn't seem to actually pan out. Like I haven't seen it work, right? And one of the ways that one of the analogies that I have in my head is basically like you have alerts for systems, right? Like you've got pager duty. Everybody, people hate being on pager duty, typically because alerts are set up poorly. And the thing that happens is basically if you have an alert that wakes somebody up in the middle of the night, that has to be like a very high signal alert. That means something is actively going wrong, and like there's a reason to wake that person up, and there's something that they should be doing to fix it. Also, that like you shouldn't just rely on that. You should have other things going on. But the TLDRs, if those alerts go off too often, if they go off too many times, people get what's called alert fatigue. And this is basically a specific case of a high signal versus a low signal source of data, right? If the alerts become low signal, then nobody pays attention to them. So they have to be high signal, right? And if they're not high signal, then you're basically just burning people out to compensate for it. And that's one of the ways that I look at the data that's generated by those tools. It's basically like it's a very low signal source of code. It doesn't work many times. You often have to re-prompt it multiple times to get it to do a thing that you think is correct. It is designed not to give you the correct answer, but to give you something that looks like a correct answer, which means that like the act of programming isn't typing text, which is something I've said to other people, and they've had like a wow, you're right moment, which I've never thought of programming as typing. Programming is developing a mental model for the way that the program works, documenting that, sharing that with other people, because the hard part of programming is not typing text. The hard part is debugging a system, right? Figuring out what's supposed to be going on, what is going on. And if you didn't write any of the code, you didn't develop any of that mental model, and it's going to be significantly harder for you to actually be able to debug any of it. And given that those tools are designed to give you things that look correct but aren't necessarily correct, is a big problem. You were recently trying to spawn 3D text in the world and have it follow your camera. Was having issues with look at, and you realized the next day it was a child's transform. Yeah. Yes, I saw somebody the other day who was trying to use transform with look at and trying to insert that as a component, and that doesn't return a transform. You want looking at to return a transform. Yeah, you tried it just to be sure. Yeah, I mean, like, it's technology, right? So forming an opinion is somewhat important. I haven't seen any indications that like prompting as a skill is hard to do or hard to learn. So like, I think that it's justified for people to like stay away from it if they want to. But yeah. You tried it and just kept messing stuff up. Yeah. One of the other things is that people get themselves like deep in these real architectural ditches because the tools will spit out code, and it'll seem like it works, and then it'll spit out more code and spit out more code, and it'll just keep building up. And then they'll have a bug and they won't be able to actually fix it because they're, you know, chest deep in code they don't understand that doesn't do what they think it does. Spawning 3D text in the world was hard in Bevy. Am I missing something? 3D text in the world. Like, 3D text to me says mesh. Right? Because how else are you going to generate something in the world? Right? If you said 2D, I think I might have a different answer, but 3D text sounds to me like you have to convert it to a mesh. I can't think of any other way. That would be like pretty reasonable. Maybe MSDFs, maybe signed distance fields could do 3D text. I don't actually know that. Maybe you could do like signed distance fields with an extrusion or something. But yeah, I don't know. 3D text sounds tough to me. Yeah, so even just flat text in the world. Text 2D will not show up without a 2D camera. Absolutely. You can control... How do I frame this? So there's 3D cameras and 2D cameras, right? And like the space in the world, according to the rendering engine, isn't different. It's all 3D at the end of the day, like when it goes down the pipeline of the GPU. But there are 3D cameras and 2D cameras because people like working with 3D and 2D cameras, right? Or 3D and 2D environments. One thing that is going to happen in the future, I think, is that there's going to be like a transform 2D for people who like only do 2D stuff and they don't want to deal with the Z index, right? So if you have, let's say, it sounds like you had a 3D camera showing the world and a 2D camera showing some text, and you wanted the text behind the UI, you can change which camera the UI shows up on, right? So one of the things that people have been talking about lately is having a dedicated UI camera, which I think is a really good idea. So if you wanted to have 3D camera with stuff, 2D camera with text or something like that, and then UI camera in front of that, that gives you the layering that you were looking for. Where are we? 2048. I haven't even run 2048 yet. Let's see. So let's run. Should we run this? We don't really need to run this. Do we need to specify the resolver anymore for the additions? I think it defaults to resolver 3 or something like that, right? Let's see. What is 2024? Well, this is a useless page. Come on. Let's see. Where's the resolver? Reserve syntax, match ergonomics. Match ergonomics reservations. I need to look at that. Cargo, Rust aware version resolver. This is edition 2024 implies resolver 3. We can get rid of resolver. I think specifying things that you don't need to specify is probably not great. From an educational perspective. Rand is going to be an interesting one. Rand has been doing some stuff. Tower defense game. Player enters a tower zone where they're prompted to click E to open a menu. That text physically appears in 3D. Oh, world space UI is what you're looking for. I think that world space UI is achievable, but it's not particularly ergonomic at the moment, is the way that I would frame it. There are ways to do it, but there's no like world space, whatever. One of the things that you could probably do right now is if you want something to show up in the 3D world, and it's anything, right? Anything you want to render that shows up in the 3D world at a specific point, you can use a camera to render that to texture, and use that texture as the texture for like a mesh 2D, or a mesh 3D or something like that, or like a plane, like a quad, right? And stick that quad somewhere in the world. So you can like render anything you want to into a quad looking space and use that image from your camera target in that space. So like you can do anything like that, especially for like the press E kind of stuff, because the press E stuff doesn't require interacting with like the UI or whatever. Like there's no, like you don't need picking on that like dialogue or whatever. You just need it to like show up. So that's probably what I would do. I would probably render it to a texture and then use that texture. Or you could like pre-render it to a texture. You know, like you don't need to do it at runtime. You could have images for different things and whatnot. But in any case. 2048. End game, new game, state transitions. I think that there's not a lot in here that's going to change from 16 to 17. One of the things that I think that I want to do is take this board implementation and move it into a plugin that I use across a couple of different workshops, which will also make this workshop a little bit smaller. So let's just bump this. Let's run cargo test to make sure the tests work, because we do have a test in here. The UI triggers are a thing that are going to change. I think otherwise this is pretty much straightforward. There's some interesting changes to the way that you can write PX. So maybe we use the new constructors for pixels and stuff. But otherwise, I think this is pretty... I don't think we've changed this picking interaction stuff. We're kind of like in a halfway state at the moment. So let's bump this and just see. I don't know which rand to pick. Let's try it with 9.2. I don't know if Bevy upgraded. I should check. Examples. Crates. What do I do? Rand. In TOML files. We're at 0.9. Okay. Bench is at 0.9. Dev dependency 0.9. Looks like we've got the update. Get random is really where the issue is. But that really only crops up on web. So we'll use 0.9. You're back, but late on the stream. Well, hello, I don't know, 10 minutes from now when you get to this point in the stream. You swear every time you get back into game dev, Bevy has another update. You love it, but damn, you have to update your code now. Yeah, Rand should work, but the difference was, I think Bevy hadn't upgraded to 0.9 in the last version. So having the two different versions of Rand, I don't remember exactly what the issue was, but there was a specific reason I didn't upgrade the last version. Perfect. I think it was related to the get random stuff, but I you know, it was 5-6 months ago at this point. I don't remember exactly why I made that choice. Okay, so we're gonna have to come back. This uses messages? It uses messages. Does it? No, it doesn't. Only uses triggers. We don't need to register that as an event. I think enable state scoped entities is on by default, so we shouldn't need that either. Scaling mode fixed vertical. This scaling mode will change in RC2 or whatever it is. Whenever that gets pushed out. Which one are we? Fixed vertical. So in the meantime, I guess I'll fully qualify it. And maybe we'll change that later. I don't know. The full qualification isn't that bad. But basically there's a scaling mode for camera and there's a scaling mode for sprites. And they are currently conflicting, but the sprite one is getting renamed, or actually just got renamed, and actually I think that's already been merged. Observers are now on. Rand doesn't have thread RNG. We're going to have to look at the docs for Rand. I don't remember what the API change between 0.8 and 0.9 was. So I'll leave that for a second. State scoped is now despawn on Do we want enter or exit? I forget what the behavior of state scoped was. This is going to be the tiles, right? Where's the pull request? Okay. Type state scoped is despawn on exit. Cool. Probably a better name for these, honestly. Justify center. Image plugin can get qualified. Bevy image plugin. Bevy image. Really? No. Yeah. So here we do minimal plugin, states plugin, asset plugin, image plugin, and then we run our test. So the only thing here that doesn't work is rand, I think. Overall looks good. This is a really like straightforward upgrade, if I'm being honest. Let's make sure that we don't have any warnings. I want to get rid of the word trigger. This is now entity, and it's no longer a function. I'm going to call this click. I've been waffling between naming this in the past tense or not. I think that for some of these events, like remove, it gets called before remove actually happens. So it's like pre-remove. But for click, it is like clicked, like it just happened. So I don't know. I think I'm just going to name it after the event specifically and avoid that whole debate. You're not familiar with trigger. Is it essentially just a shorthand for a system that will only run if there's an event to process? Yes, that's observers. So there is trigger is still going to be the function, right? So commands.trigger, right? Commands.trigger will send this event. This event will get received by an observer, which is defined here. So new tile handler accepts the new tile event. Whenever you commands.trigger, if you're familiar with what a sync point is, this is when that happens. If you're not familiar with a sync point, then this just happens like as soon as possible, more or less. So this event gets fired. After that function ends, this is into the command queue ready to be processed. So this gets processed. This function runs for that event. And then we add that at the global level, I think, in this example. So add observer with that function. And that trigger, that like on syntax, trigger is 0.16's verbiage for it. On is the 0.17 version of that word. Why do I have it commented out? Did I start updating the wrong? I don't think so. Sometimes I change things as I'm doing scripting. We'll get rid of that. We don't need that to be an event. It could be an event, but we don't need it to be. There's nowhere else that you can update the score. Hey Zerk bro, how's it going? So definitely more of an observer pattern with respect to naming. It is literally called observers. Yeah. It is literally called observers. That is the feature. Right. It is an observer. On speak, this runs, trigger, speak, etc. I have a video on observers on this channel. I also just updated all the Bevy examples. So this repo should have a 0.17 PR. And in this repo, I cover a bunch of the concepts, things like hooks and observers, with a bunch of examples. So component hooks are a lighter weight form of observers. And observers run basically like after component hooks. Component hooks are kind of like, there needs to be a limited way to do things internally for performance reasons. Observers will run just after component hooks. Component hooks are more for like holding up invariants. Observers, you can have your own events, any custom event. And there's a whole bunch of things you can do with them. They can run recursively. You can bubble the event through other entities, etc. So it's very cool. I don't smoke. I don't smoke cigarettes, and I don't smoke tobacco, and it actually really bugs me, honestly. Not that you smoke. Like, I don't care that you smoke. You get to do whatever you want to do. But I don't vape. I don't smoke tobacco. I don't smoke cigarettes. It really fucks up like my throat and stuff. Let's see if the test runs. Actually, I one of the reasons that I didn't stream, like, I think it's probably like 2 months ago now, is because my neighbors smoked a lot, and it filled my apartment with smoke, and I actually couldn't speak well enough without coughing. So like, you do you, but I don't at all. Okay, so this is running. Our systems are logging, what is it, rand? So this is click. I was doing trigger before I got distracted, right? Oh, right, we don't actually use the event data. Okay, what else do we have in terms of warnings? Thread RNG and trigger and UI. Do we still have a trigger in here? No, we don't. So we're really just down to thread RNG. So RNG rust. So I think we're just left with RNG then, right? So it's not thread. What does the warning say? Rename to RNG. So we just do a rename here. It's in main. So rand RNG. No warnings. Test still works. Game still works. The UI here and the design is very simple because I'm expecting this to be like a fairly early game for people to cover. So I don't want to make it too... One of the things that I've learned ranking these workshops is there's a huge trade-off between making something like production ready that looks good and making something that is good for an educational resource. And making these things look good kind of takes away from teaching about things like resources and components and stuff. So I think what I'm going to do in the longer term is take all of the stuff that is like, make these buttons look good or whatever, and do those in different workshops. So like, if you just want a button, follow the workshop, you get a button that works. If you want a good looking button, follow one of the like button workshops or like UI workshops or something. Spawn tile position points. Cool. I think I've reviewed this code quite a bit. This has been a workshop that I've updated through probably like 8 versions of Bevy at this point. So I'm pretty sure this is good. Bevy 0.17. Git push u origin Bevy 0.17. Cool. I think I have to make the decision about whether this board stuff gets included in this workshop or as its own. I guess it doesn't remove that much from this workshop specifically. But this code has to get used in like 2 other workshops as well. Okay, let's see. Active. Let's see. Stats is what I was looking for. Hey Anders, how's it going? Welcome to Saturday Bevy. I think Snake and Minesweeper, I am going to remove Bevy ECS tile map from those. Which is semi-unfortunate because I think that Bevy ECS tile map... how do I frame this? So Bevy ECS tile map is a great library, right? There's things built on top of it like LDTK integrations as well as tiled integrations, and those integrations are fantastic. There's also an upstream tile map implementation that's starting to be built. So teaching people to use Bevy ECS tile map feels like the wrong long-term direction. Because what I'm expecting to happen is that eventually the upstream built-in tile map implementation inside of Bevy will get good enough to basically just replace Bevy ECS tile map. And then the other integrations will get built on top of the upstream version at some point. So the choice is either replace Bevy ECS tile map with the upstream version if possible, or don't use a tile map. And I think that there are pros and cons to each approach. Can we do block breaker? Block breaker doesn't use avian. I think it uses regular collision. Yes, that underscore versus dash is very important. Okay, so we've got block breaker. This should just run because it's 0.16 still. Actually, yeah, we're on 0.16. I started changing all the main branches to the most recent version. Cargo run. This is a very straightforward, fairly basic implementation of like Arkanoid or block breaker. Oh, we do we use avian? We do use avian. I don't know. We can use avian. It's fine. I'll just have to use my version of avian. We don't have any other Bevy dependencies, right? It's just Bevy and avian 2D. Okay, that's fine. It's funny that I left this on the commit hash for this, so... Just remember another weird thing. Bevy 0.16 seems to have frame pacing issues on Windows 11. FPS would change rapidly between 40 and 180 in windowed mode. Bevy frame pace is what you would need to look for. Frame pacing is not built in. If you're looking for frame pacing, you're looking for Bevy frame pace. Currently. Yeah. Oh, it's got a 0.17 version. Perfect. Perfect. But yeah, frame pacing. I know people want to upstream that crate, but it has not been upstreamed yet. So that's your option if you want frame pacing for the moment. Let's take a look at the code here. This is not a lot of code. We kind of just set restitution and friction and stuff so that the ball bumps around a bunch. We're not going to need state scoped entities. You can reset it as much as you want. A couple components here. We don't reflect anything in these workshops. I think that's the right choice in general. I don't know. None of these workshops actually use a reflection. And I think once you get to a point where you can use a reflection, you're probably a little bit more knowledgeable. So static rigid body half spaces to define the playing area. This is like left wall, top wall, etc. Then we've got canvas. Got a respawn ball area below the collider for the ball. That's a sensor for avian. And then new game. We don't need state scope. This is going to be despawn on exit. This is actually the collider thing. You asked for like how to deal with collider events. This is the collider events tutorial, actually. It seemed like a necessity to you. The rapid FPS changes made you think you were experiencing physics schedule conflicting with update schedule movement stuttering before you realized the frame pace was it. Yes, I don't think anybody is under any illusions of like frame pacing being unimportant. I think people want to upstream it. It just hasn't happened yet. Like, it's, how do I frame this? The state of open source projects is like things get done when people do them. There's no corporation that is like Bevy needs to do this or whatever. So like, if for example I'm not saying you have to do this. Like if you wanted it to be upstreamed and you did the work to upstream it, it would get upstreamed. Like that's the state of the world right now. Just a priorities thing, I guess. To some extent, yes, but you can only determine priority in a large open source group in certain ways, right? So, like a corporation that has employees and is paying everybody to be there can say, this quarter, we're going to get rid of all the work you did last quarter. It's going in the trash can. You're working on this now. Bevy doesn't do that, right? So from a priority perspective, it is the priorities of every individual contributor. If somebody wanted it to be upstreamed and had the time and inclination to do that, then it would be upstreamed. Right? I can't think of anybody that would be like against Bevy frame pace upstreaming. Maybe there's a reason or whatnot, but I think the one thing that we didn't do in this demo is I skipped the thing where like the edge of the paddle is supposed to send it more in the like left or right direction. Also, there seems to be a bug there on respawn. Hang on. Let me take a look at this. Because the way we're doing the outline is by spawning effectively 2 meshes, if I remember correctly. Let's see. Ball is here. Mesh with children, My guess is that when we respawn, we don't spawn the children for some reason. Where's respawn? Respawn ball area. Press R to restart game. We just transition into... Are we despawning anything ever? We despawn the ball for sure. Let's see. On, enter, game over, show restart button. On, enter, playing new game. New game. Spawns the paddle. So are we despawning? Wait, hang on. Did I forget to despawn stuff in this? On game over, show restart button. Restart game. Despawn is state scoped. Right? So the ball is state scoped. State scoped playing, state scoped over. So all of these things should, right? Because this spawns, it's correct. We've got a white inner area and a black outline. That collider looks a little bit off, actually. Let's get the physics debug plugin in here. Right. Like, that was weird. We are interpolating. We're adding the physics debug plugin. Why is the physics debug plugin not showing? That's because we're not using colliders. Is that why? No, we are using colliders. Let me do this. Let me say, because this is on, I think 0.3 is the current version. So let's just make sure that this is all up to date. And that there's no weirdness happening. But yeah, the open source priorities thing, that's actually what Miles talked about in their birthday post. Working in groups. This talks a lot about how work gets done in Bevy on a larger scale. And working groups are one of the ways. Like, you don't need a working group for everything, right? Like, the PRs that are getting merged every day. Right, like, these don't need working groups. Add a release note, etc., etc. These all just need two community approvals, and then they can get merged, is the way that Bevy works. So it's very, very, very different than, like, a corporation would be. I was going to talk about one of the ones that I did recently, but it's already on page 50 bajillion. Stuff gets merged so often. There's so many things. Yeah, so here's an example, right? I added a reflection serialization example, gave my like the reasoning behind what I was doing, showed the output and whatever. Here's the example. It's got some code in it, you know. This did not require a working group. This was just like, I noticed a thing. And then Jan approved it, Alice approved it, and it went in. So like, you don't need working groups for everything, but working groups are nice for long, extended topics. And I just changed our dependency graph here, so it'll just take a second to build. It was weird that Physics Debug plugin didn't show the colliders. It should have shown the colliders, which made me think something was weird. You assume something as big of a deal as frame pacing deserves a lot of eyes. I don't think so. Maybe. My guess would be that like 2 subject matter experts on the rendering side could approve that and it would just go in. Right? I don't know what is required to upstream this. Like, don't take it as like, don't take it as me saying that this is an easy thing to do, because that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the difficulty in upstreaming this functionality is getting somebody to do the work, not getting it approved. Like, the implementation here actually looks fairly straightforward. I don't know if this is the implementation that upstream wants, but like, somebody just needs to commit the time to do it and have those conversations is all it is. So we've got app state, state scoped entities, physics plugins, restitution configuration, clear color, on enter, playing, on enter. I started getting rid of all the UI in these games. That's why we have like a big piece of text in the game over state that's just like press R to respawn. Maybe we'll center that text. Doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be super ugly. But like specifying a font or whatever is not really in scope, so to speak. Or like having a whole start menu, for example. One of the things that I've found from these workshops is that everybody skips the parts they don't want to do. And UI is a thing that a lot of people don't want to do. There's a lot of the quaternion handling API, which is a bit unwieldy. I think the quaternions in general are a bit unwieldy. You assume that's another place where it's more a lack of time and less a lack of quality. Yeah, a lot of the math APIs are actually really good. I think that issues with usage that don't have issues in the GitHub repo won't get fixed, right? So one of the things that comes up is like people run into problems and they assume that from experience with other projects that if they file an issue, it doesn't matter, that they shouldn't file issues, that they shouldn't interact with the project or whatever. Because like, I don't know, somebody in some other project yelled at them one time, you know? That is not how Bevy works. Bevy is a thing where if you say, hey, I have this issue with this API, somebody will discuss that with you. If you say like, hey, I don't like I'm trying to use quaternions in this way and it's tough to do and I wish there was a function to do this, somebody will have that discussion either in the Bevy math dev channel, math dev, or in an issue on the repo. Honest question: why use Rapier 2D over Avian? Why not use Rapier 2D over Avian? Okay, different question. Avian is a little bit more Bevy native. The way that Rapier works is that Rapier basically has its own physics world, completely separate from Bevy's whatever, right? Because Rapier is a project that gets used outside of Bevy in different like JavaScript contexts and things like that, different simulations and whatnot, which is great. But that means it has its own physics world. And because it has its own physics world, you need to have some glue layer to connect those two things. You need to connect Bevy to Rapier in some way between the two worlds. By contrast, Avian is kind of like Bevy native, right? So you don't have that. I don't want to call it a mismatch because Rapier is like fine, although it is kind of a mismatch in some sense. But I don't want to be like, it's not a mismatch in like the Rapier is bad sense. I just want to be clear about that. It's a mismatch in the sense of like Rapier is just an independent project, and Avian is more like Bevy ECS native. You use Avian 3D because you're going to have multiplayer, and without adhering to ECS style, it becomes difficult to coordinate. As Chris is saying, Rapier is very independent. Yeah. So like rollback networking is something that I think is easier to achieve with Avian compared to Rapier because of the way that the physics worlds are set up. You're working on a Houdini plugin for Bevy, but you couldn't find any work about the USD file format. Any thoughts about USD in the future? I think people are interested generally in USD. There are differing, I don't want to call them opinions because they don't feel very strong. There are different thoughts on how mature USD is. There's a couple of people, we'll say in rendering, that think that USD is about as mature as GLTF, and that there's another group of people that is kind of like USD seems to be getting used by a lot of like movie projects or animation projects, like a lot of pre-rendered big stuff, not real-time work. Not that that's, well, so the caveat there is that the reason it's being used in those places is because the animation studios have put in the work to make it work. There are game companies using USD. So as far as I'm aware, in general, speaking broadly, Bevy, the project, would be open to supporting USD at some point in the future, but Bevy is going to have its own scene format, so it's probably going to be something like USD gets processed into a bunch of Bevy native types, and then you use those Bevy native types, rather than like give me a USD file, spawn it, and work with USD or something like that. So I think generally the sentiment about USD is positive. Again, like don't take my words too seriously. I could be misrepresenting something. But I think the USD sentiment is positive. There does need to be like a Rust implementation because Bevy is not going to embed a C dependency, right? Like USD, as far as I'm aware, is like a huge wallop of C code like dumped into a repo somewhere. And Bevy is not going to ship a C dependency. Letting cargo work and letting multi-platform Rust projects work by default is just such a win. That's just not going to happen. So I think people are positive about USD in general. There is nobody that I know of that is currently working on like active USD support besides, I guess, you. I have questions about working with Houdini though. I talked about this post a little bit earlier. This post is sticking component data in extras fields for exports from programs like Blender and potentially Houdini. I don't know that much about Houdini's custom properties. So my question to you would be, do you think it's worth investigating placing component data into Houdini custom properties in some way? I also need to figure out if USD has similar things. It doesn't support USD yet. Quaternions are just routers with a worse name. The perennial argument. What's the proper way to make dynamic observers, i.e. observers that are enabled or disabled based on game state? Generally speaking, don't send events for observers you don't want to run. That's the TLDR. Right? You don't need to enable or disable the observers because they won't do anything if you don't send the events. So really, it's don't send the events. And that is a contrast to the way that we're used to thinking about systems, because systems run at a fixed point in the schedule all the time, right? They run in, update, after these 3 systems, we have whatever. Or like transform propagation will run at the end of the frame. Things like that. So because they run every frame or in update schedule or whatever, you need to have run conditions to tell them whether they should be running or not. Observers don't need that. I guess the only thing that I could think of would be if you were trying to handle an event differently based on which state you were in and you wanted to have them in different functions. It's the only thing I could think of. But you can just create dynamic observers. You can absolutely spawn observers. The repo I showed earlier shows an example of spawning observers. Not Skeen. Skeen is not the repo I'm looking for. Bevy examples. Let's go for concepts, hooks and observers, bin, and then the last one is going to be like observer on target, right? So if you look at this code specifically, you can create an observer, you can tell it to watch some entity, and then you can insert that on whatever entity you want, right? So you can kind of like create an observer whenever you want. You might have to use different APIs than the ones that you're used to with like app.addObserver or whatever. But you can absolutely create observers whenever you want to. And then getting rid of this observer is just despawning the entity that the observer is on. So that's entirely valid and possible. I would caution that because observers don't run if you don't send the events, that not sending the event is probably the first thing I would start to do, rather than trying to despawn and manage observers like that. You can also stick observers on entities if that makes more sense, and they'll live with the life cycle of the entity. Back to USD. USD is kind of mature like GLTF, but yes, USD is more an intermediate format. GLTF is more of a final finish format. Yeah, GLTF, that's one of the reasons that GLTF doesn't support non-triangulated meshes, because the goal is to put it into GLTF and then send it to the browser and render it, or something like that. Just learned about USD recently. You do think it's more oriented towards filmmaking, but there's nothing stopping broader use cases. Yeah, I think that's the point, right? I wish it wasn't named USD. Format. Right, this is USD. I'll keep it up on screen while we're talking about it. Yeah, except time and energy, which is the perennial open source issue. I think that if we want USD to work for more real-time cases like games, somebody has to be putting in the time in various capacities, and that's the state of the world, right? If time doesn't get put in, then it doesn't happen. I do think that there's a Rust USD implementation. I don't remember the crate name offhand, but that could be very interesting. Which current Steam game could be made entirely with Bevy? Is there a limit to what Bevy can create? Could it ever support building a game as complex as GTA 5 for a COD-like game? I think the things preventing Bevy from being used for things that are large like that, there's a couple of things on the rendering side, like streaming data, that are really important for like really big maps. But more importantly, I think the content authoring pipelines for games like that are their own huge infrastructure, and like people have to build that infrastructure, right? I think that there's probably a lot of bumps on the road to somebody doing something like that. Also, the other thing is that Bevy doesn't currently ship to consoles. So if you're going to build a GTA 5 or a COD-like game or something, you can absolutely build like a COD-like game or like a Quake-like game in Bevy today, right? If you're going to build GTA 5 with streaming assets and things like that, that is a feature that Bevy needs and doesn't have for large maps like that. Foxtrot. I can never. I do a really bad job with names. Foxtrot is like a Quake-like controller, if I remember correctly. Or there's a couple of things that Jan has done that all like center around Quake-like controllers. So like you can absolutely. Or Chain Boom is another one. That's like a Quake-like controller. That was in the last Bevy Game Jam. Back on Houdini and USD. This is your work right now, and you're also thinking about component data, but you can come up with a proper structure about that. Yeah, so the component data thing, I've already done a ton of investigation into like what that data needs to look like for reflection to be able to reflect that data. So if it ever comes time and you're like, hey, I would like component data, feel free to reach out and be like, hey, Chris, how does this work, or what does this do? I am interested in like the reason I wrote the post for Skeen for the format is because I'm looking at upstreaming that into Bevy itself, at which point other software like Houdini or Maya or whatever would be able to produce data in that format, and those components would get instantiated when it came into Bevy for everybody, not just, Blender GLTFs or whatever. Bevy and most game engines aren't really limited in what they can create. Yeah. Doesn't that break for mouse and cursor-based observers? You're referring to the like dynamic creation of observers? I don't think so. You mean not sending the events? I mean, like in the observer, you can always check the state if that's something you want to do. Like if in state, then do something. I think one of the things that Jan was bringing up, I think yesterday, is that input events should be batched rather than observers. I don't know where I land on that yet. Haven't really thought it through too much. But yeah, it's an open question in terms of like input events. You absolutely can create and destroy observers if you want to, though. Oh, hey, Hukasu. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you in chat. Bevy is very extendable. What does not have natively, you can make yourself. Absolutely. It's very flexible. You can use as much or as little as you want. Yep. I.e., clicking game breaks when you're back at the main menu since the game isn't running. Click in-game breaks when you're back at the main menu. Well, typically, if you clicked on something, you wouldn't like unwrap, right? Like if you had an observer that responded to clicks and needed to click on something like a mesh or whatever, first of all, picking is a thing that will only happen on the mesh, right? If you're doing mesh picking, you're not going to get a mesh picking event on the UI. But typically, if you have a picking-based event or some other observer event and it needs to do some work, early returning, if the data isn't in the right format or like the stuff doesn't exist, is the right move, right? So the game shouldn't break. Your observer should be able to handle like if things aren't set up correctly, right? You can warn or whatever if something happens, but like you shouldn't be crashing your game. You guess all games, Bevy's modular. Yep. At its core, Bevy is just an incredibly flexible ECS framework. Pretty much the best way to handle the sort of logic you end up having in video games. Pretty good. Bevy USD exists? Is that what you're saying? I don't think so. There is a USD crate written in Rust. I think there's a couple of them. Like a couple of them are like old, right? Like somebody started and then didn't finish. But I think there is a recent one. Maybe it's OpenUSD? Yeah, OpenUSD has a publish from 2 months ago. I don't know how far along this is, just to be clear. Like, I'm not deeply in the know on USD. And USD is huge, like they're saying here. So proprietary hardware software and its friction with free open source is added again. Yeah, with the console stuff. Yeah. Just watching while class is in lunch break. We'll be back soon. Oh, I hope that you're doing well in school. Let's see. .0. .0 is wrong. I think that these are all trigger target, right? At one point I had an opinion that the deref on trigger was confusing, and I think it still is. I think it became less confusing. I don't know if it became less confusing or if I just came around to it. I think it's weird that trigger like is the event but also isn't the event, if that makes sense. But it is what it is. It's got a deref implementation to the event, so okay, so physics debug plugin is working. And then you can see that the collider for the actual paddle has got that ellipsoid to it, just so that we don't have to manually implement I think I just messed up the collision actually. Bricks contains trigger target. Before this was .0. What was .0 in... Bit of a debug session here. Okay, so target is not what we want, because target is always the ball. So what did this become? Collider, which would mean that this would work. Collider. There we go. This also changed again in 0.17. Ellipsoid is a great way of doing that behavior. Yeah, I was thinking about it, and I think a lot about like what actually gets included in these workshops. I think that this register is a little bit above. It's a little bit weird on that collision for the respawn area, and I'm not exactly sure why. Hey Rootster, how's it going? Doing all right. Doing some 0.17 stuff. Yeah, the ellipsoid for that behavior I think makes the most sense, and we don't have to do anything to get it to do that, you know? Like we don't have to manually code the collision angles. It's not like quote unquote the right way, you know? Like to do the math, you would just do the math. But I think this is fine. The point of this isn't to teach somebody how to do vector math. It's with Avian, yeah. Is this with Avante? It is with Avian, yeah. So if respawn areas contains trigger.collider, the thing that I'm confused about right now, I think we need to make the respawn area a little bit lower. Because sometimes you can hit the paddle, but it despawns the ball, which is kind of a weird and annoying bug. Where's our respawn area? I think the math on this was actually pretty nice. And doing this will take basically half the paddle size. Doing these like little fiddly math things is something that I don't love including. And it's obviously simple math, right? Like the canvas size over 2 minus 10, like you can think about this in your head or whatever, but like it starts to get a little bit fiddly if you don't know which way y up is. So you don't know which direction these 10 pixels are in. And people who are just learning will get confused by that. I think overall that's not really a problem per se, though. So let's do the update. This is going to have to be git equals the repo that I have up currently. So this will need to be that's my personal site. Where's Avian? This exists. I swear, GitHub gets less useful every day. It's really wild. That's not the URL I need. I need this one. And then branch is like Bevy 0.17 temporaries is what I called it. Branch. And then we're at 0.17.0-rc.1. So Avian, it doesn't sound like Avian's going to get an RC release. It sounds like Avian's going to get a release when stable goes live. I don't know how true that is, but it seems to be the way that. Let me actually hang on. We're gonna do a clean build here, and I'm just gonna get rid of log file. Yeah, and shitification of GitHub. It's weird. Because, like, the stuff that I use it for is not the stuff that they seem to be focusing on as a company. But they are... I think they've effectively reached monopoly status for open source. And that's never a good thing. So I'm not expecting this to have too many differences in terms of the amount of code. The state scoped entities goes away. The triggers become on. Right? So this is on collision. Well, actually, I don't know if they renamed this event yet. So we'll find out in a second. It might be on collision start at the moment. Looking into hosting your own stuff, but it's just blah. Yeah. I don't know. I host a lot on GitHub, right? Like if you look at the Rust Adventure stuff, I think I have 100 repos or something here. Yeah, 85 repos of Rust code for people to look at and explore, and like things that back workshops and things that like I've had here for videos, and it's a lot of stuff. And it's nice to be able to send somebody to the same site everybody else uses to be able to navigate that code. Especially for people who might be less familiar with Git itself. So like moving off of GitHub for all of that content, I don't know. Like I don't really want to be responsible for hosting a GitHub server, if that makes sense, like a Git repository server. I am only a single like human, and all the time that I would spend keeping, say, like a Git server up to date, or a, you know, anything that I have to host myself is takes away from the time I can spend actually building the educational stuff. So even the website, right? Like I chose to implement the website myself for various reasons. But that means that any time that I spend improving the website is not time that goes to the educational stuff. Yeah, this is... my computer's getting old. It's an M1. It is a Mac. The compiles are definitely slower than they could be. This is like a 4th or 5th generation old laptop right now. This is... I noticed it get slow one day a little while ago. But I haven't had a chance to get a new one. So I don't know if I'm going to get one with the M5s. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. But yes, this is definitely slower. The computer I have is fairly old, etc. I don't have any of the configurations for like fast compiles either. No, it's not an Intel Mac. It is the M1. You host your own stuff on Forjo. I don't know how to pronounce that. And push only as a mirror. Yeah. You need to go and do some Bevy stuff, but can you tell me about Bevy UI? What should you use today? It depends on what you're trying to achieve. I would start with Bevy UI, and if you can't get Bevy UI to do what you want it to do, then start looking at other options. There are other options. You can do things like eGUI, etc. But Bevy UI is getting better every release, so I would start there. Everything of going to Linux instead of Mac. To some extent, yeah. There are a lot of really nice things for me on a Mac. Like I use Blender, and then I've got like Substance, Like if I want Substance Designer, it's just here, right? It's going to take 30 years to boot up, isn't it? Well, I don't know if that's my computer or Adobe. But yeah, programs that are digital content creation suites are pretty guaranteed to work on Mac. That's one of the reasons that I stick around on Mac. Also, the computers get better, right? Like, I have an M1, so maybe placing Linux on this machine doesn't make a lot of sense, but I could place it on, like I have a PC over there that is running the stream right now. I could instead run the stream off the Mac and do Linux on the PC or something like that. There are options. But Macs are really nice, especially if you like. Actually, if I was gonna do Linux, I might get a framework. Thinking about it, actually. Anyway, not to derail too much. What you found is the hard way of doing things is always there, free and open as ever. Oh yeah, with Git hosting, yeah. You think it's an ARM? Yes, it is. It's an M1 ARM. Thanks for your work. Could you please shed some light on the current state of networking multiplayer part of Bevy? I would go to the either the Lightyear channel in the Bevy Discord, or one of the other networking channels, and just ask. There's a couple of different approaches. They have been working on things for many releases now. Different tools are good for different things. If you need like Rocket League rollback, there's a library for that can do that. If you need something a little bit less real time and physicsy, there's stuff for that, etc. So that's who I would go ask. I would go ask the networking channel in the Bevy Discord and say, hey, I'm going to build XYZ game. Which networking approach would work for me? For Linux, you can use Window Manager. Yeah, Neri looks really cool. What is the... I think it's Neri. Like Neri is very cool as a window manager. This is what I would use if I was on Linux. State scopes not found. Perfect. Framework for the win. What input crates do you use? In basic Bevy, Leafwing, or Bevy Advanced Input? It's Bevy Enhanced Input, and that's the one I use. Bevy Enhanced Input is like Leafwing 2.0, and if you can think about it on a longer frame timeline, it seems like when Bevy Enhanced Input lands on good ergonomic APIs, that will become upstreamed at some point. That's the goal anyway. That's where the development is happening. So we'll see. You're going to try out some full stack Rust. My site looks good. Do you have any guides or tips to get started? Yeah, I guess it depends on what you mean by full stack Rust. If you're looking for like a modern UI framework, Leptos is a great start. There's a bunch of examples in the repos that you can go and try to use. The other thing, whatchamacallit. So there's Leptos. Leptos is great. Leptos.dev is actually the site that I wanted to go to. This is like, I don't know, I gave a talk at RustConf 2024 about this kind of approach and why it exists and what it's for. It can do a bunch of different things: server side, client side, islands, etc., etc. Leptos is great. You probably need to pair that with a server. I typically pair that with Axum. This is just the web server to stick it on. There's an integration between Leptos and the server for APIs and stuff. Those are the two places that I would look to get started. I find those projects to be quite good. You don't get what people see in Neri, but more power to y'all. I don't know. What do you use instead? Like i3 or something? Yeah, you've done backend work in fintech for years now. You're trying to get full stack going to be appreciated. Yeah, nice. Yeah, I would check out Leptos. Leptos is my go-to for, you know, the rendering side of things in general. Hyperland is... I've heard of Hyperland. I haven't used it, though. Okay, so our trigger changes down here. Let's start with state scoped is now despawn on exit. This is on. Hopefully this is like... going to give me the warning. Is it not going to give me the warning? It's not going to give me the warning because my code doesn't compile yet. We're fixed vertical, right? Fixed vertical. I'm glad we got a PR in to fix this because having two scaling modes is kind of annoying. And then collider. I don't know which collider this is supposed to be. This is what, collider 1 and collider 2 now? Let's try collider 1. Or I guess collider 2. Because my intuition says collider 1 is me and collider 2 is the other thing, but maybe that's not true. I don't know. We'll find out. Yep, that works. Intuition for the win. Interesting that I think our visuals changed a little bit. Even using Dioxys full stack, it's awesome. You could see yourself using it for everything when it cooked 2 or more versions down. When you say Dioxys full stack, what do you mean? Like you're running it on a server? Or do you mean that you're using it for like native and web? Use DWM. Yeah, there's so many window managers. NixOS with stock Plasma. Maybe it is random. Sometimes the ball is collider 1, sometimes collider 2. Do not assume. Yeah, fair. Yeah. Unfortunately, this isn't published, so the docs aren't ready for me to read. But I will go check. However, it is happening. It is collider 2 with a degree of certainty that is 100% at the moment, which makes me feel like it is always going to be in this case. I guess theoretically it could be, you know, determined based on the compile order or something like that, but I don't think so. 100% is fine, yeah. The only one you've tried was U. Yeah, U is fine. I think, what is it? U and Sycamore are the 2 other web-related. I don't really have anything bad to say about either of them. If they work for you, then wonderful. That's wonderful. Basically all UI frameworks across not just Rust, but UI in general on the web have this like component model. So the concepts translate pretty well. Things like create signal are pretty universal APIs, not just in Rust, but across many different UI solutions, Rust, JavaScript, etc. So like the difference in writing Sycamore code versus U code versus like Leptos code is not terribly a high bar. And I think they're all still active. I think that Sycamore and U are slightly less active than Leptos historically. But I think they are all still active projects. I think I was using U before Leptos existed. But there are things about Leptos' approach that I really appreciate. So do we think this is collision start now? Perfect. You'll notice that we also don't have like anything blocking you from like going off to the side. We could do something like that, but I don't feel like didn't feel particularly important for what people are getting out of the workshop, which is basically like an introduction to Avian. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, that's a YouTube thing, unfortunately. What's one crate other than Bevy that you can't live without when using Bevy? Avian makes its way into a lot of my projects. Bevy enhanced input for input makes it into a lot of my projects. If I'm doing 3D, this is going to be cheating because I made this library, but it's going to be Skein. And this isn't for like every project, right? Technically, you can use Blender for 2D. There are people doing it. But obviously, you don't always need Blender in a project. But if I do need Blender, then I use Skein. Avian, Bevy enhanced input. Let's see what else comes to mind. If I need noise, I do NOIZ these days. Noise is really fantastic. You do need a little bit of understanding about like how noise gets created to use the API. But there are some like starter combinations, so you can like just go to Perlin and it's got it ready to go for you. But you can do a bunch of custom stuff as well, which is very, very cool. I think I'm going to use NOIZ instead of the other noise library that I was using in previous workshops. Let's see what else comes to mind. Hanabi for particles, but like I don't use particles in like too many projects. Yeah, I think that's it. Bevy Seedling is going to be another one for audio. If you're going to do audio, you're going to want Bevy Seedling. So like, I don't know that I would say these are every project crates, but like audio is pretty foundational. Physics is pretty foundational, even though it's not used in every project. You know, if I'm building a 3D application, I'm using Skein, etc. So, yeah. Search for Dioxys full stack. Dioxys full stack. This thing? Like, I don't know. I feel like they just refer to full stack as in server. They do mention server functions. This specifically, like they name a feature full stack, I guess. Hydration. Hydration sounds like there's a server. Okay. Static site generation, Axum integration. They're built on Axum by default, which is great. It's been a while since I like really tried to build a project with the Axis. I think the last project I tried to build was a couple of versions ago. They're doing really cool things with hot reloading, with sub-second and stuff. But yeah. And for your other question, I don't use any of them. Yeah, but basically what you do is define server functions, and they define the Axum API. That's generally like every UI framework does that at this point, right? Like this server here. Let's see if I can remember the name of this crate. Nope. Server FNS, I think, might be the right. Nope. See if I can find this crate. Server functions. I don't think it's server function. I don't think this is the right one. No, I think this is the wrong one. I can't remember what the crate is called. Let's see. Does Leptos depend on it still? I think they do. Leptos server FN, this one. I believe this is the same library used in both projects. At one point it was. I don't know if it still is. But Leptos and, that is to say, Leptos and Dioxys use like effectively the same server function implementation down to actually using the same crate for the implementation, which is really funny. Server functions are very, very, very common these days in UI frameworks. Yeah, Blitz has been in progress for a while. Is Blitz usable? Last time I checked, it wasn't. I think the only thing that worries me about Blitz is potential accessibility issues. They say they're going to use Access Kit, but does that mean that you get things like tab index? I feel like that's one of the really strong points for literal web-based implementations. Like you end up being able to do things like I can tab through this whole page and I can, keyboard navigate and hit enter and et cetera, right? And that kind of stuff is really important, and I don't want to rebuild that every application. So Blitz is very interesting, but I need it to have a comparable feature set to the web for me to use it. Mesh circle. See, this feels a little bit weird. So we have a circle here. This is Slate 950. That's children white, right? So if I let this go and it despawns and I respawn, now it doesn't have the white one in the front. Now it does. Now it does. Now it doesn't. So that's something I need to figure out. Probably just a Z indexing issue, but I would have expected it to flicker. Like if it was actually a Z index issue, I would have expected it to flicker. Isn't Blitz meant for more for mobile and desktop apps? That's what I'm saying though, right? Like so actually I have, a thing over here, right? Let's see. Hopefully this example runs. As I completely biff it. Where did that code go? I like that you can see everything flashing. I just updated my computer and stuff, so I don't know how I don't know how you buy Treats multi-monitor yet. Okay, so this is a thing that I am currently working on. Let's do configure. I think I already changed. But these need to be refs for the way that I wrote it. We do It's rare to see refs. Maybe I don't do that, and maybe I do this instead, and then those are already references. But I think these need to be mutable, right? Cannot assign, yeah. Anyway, this example isn't particularly relevant, and I have to fix some stuff about it. But basically, like, if you render WebGPU to a window, that's all great, and it's performant and everything. But you don't get any mouse interaction by default. You don't get tabbing. You don't get anything. Sure, it's not the pre-pass fragment. We got a joker in chat. Is there a place you can see the 0.17.0-rc changes? Yes, there is, but you're not going to be happy about it. There's no current page yet. There's no page up on the website or anything. But if you want to look at release notes, go to the repo, go to Bevy release content in the repo. Release notes is going to be the features. Migration guides is going to be anything that you need to migrate. The unfortunate part is that these are all separate files right now. So there's no single page for you to look at yet. But if this is acceptable to you, the information is all there. Actually, I think because this is going to require these, I don't think that this is the way that I'm going to organize this data. This is meant to be a WGPU educational resource. So this is not going to be asref, but I'm just going to write it anyway. This has to be asmute, right? But this is generally, I don't know that I want to force people into using asmute. This one doesn't mutate, I don't think. But yeah, like There's no way to put like an input box here. There's no, like, this is just WGPU, right? You don't get anything that you get on a website. And by using like the web, I get all of these inputs, all of this tab navigation, et cetera, et cetera. I get keyboard accessibility. Like, there's so much stuff that you get that I don't want to rebuild in every site. There's still some fixes that we are waiting on. For 0.17 before stable, absolutely. It's the release candidate process. I think that the 0.17.0-rc.1 will be the first version that has all the fixes that I need for various stuff. But otherwise, things are going pretty well. Yeah, the joke that's only relevant to the two people who are debugging pre-pass fragment shit for 3 days. That fix, I want to make sure that fix gets in, actually. I don't think... I might want to PR to this. There's one more, yeah. Maybe I'll take this up later. The thing that needs to happen is there's one more... We're always setting pre-pass fragment for the pre-pass now. And this refactor needs to happen. So this was gated on pre-pass fragment before. When it wasn't set, it was just running the pre-pass alpha discard. When it is set, it runs the alpha discard only for meshlets. Which is kind of strange. So like the question is, when do you run that? And I think you just run that all the time. I think that goes on line 143. But I'm not sure. 509 out of 532 issues closed for 0.17. More stuff is going into 0.17's milestone, if that's what you're tracking. 0.17. Did this not get merged? CI is borked. Interesting. Partial reflect, boxed it, yada yada. Try to produce a concrete instance of the type to deserialize by using the reflected from reflect. I guess that makes sense. So there's two deserializers. There's the typed reflect deserialize. I realize that nobody is following along with what I'm thinking in my head suddenly. There's two reflect deserializers. There's typed reflect deserializer and there's reflect deserializer. Typed reflect. There's typed reflect deserializer and there is reflect deserializer. Right. So one of these expects a known type and the other one gets the type from the data. So I think that change specifically in the PR is if you already know the type, even if the data coming in is formatted in a way that you wouldn't have to know the type, it falls back to that to be able to parse it, even if you're given data in the format that supplies its type with it. Oh, really? Yeah, you want them to get the Feathers crate done right. Super keen to try out the new UI widgets. Yeah, Feathers is still experimental. It will be experimental probably for the foreseeable future. I feel like Feathers is experimental until all of BSN lands, in my mind. Not because Feathers is bad in any way, but because I don't think you can stabilize Feathers without BSN also being stabilized. So BSN probably lands in the macro form in 0.18. And then the BSN asset format also needs to land at some point. So like maybe Feathers stabilizes on top of the macro, but I don't know how you take it out of experimental without the asset format. Maybe we do. I don't know. Yeah, it's a bit of a wait. Yeah. I mean, BSN is a long-term project for sure. Cool. They're not expecting this to go in just yet. That's a good PR. I want to remember that one though. So let me pull this off to the side so that I can actually take a look at that and do an actual review later. I let myself get completely distracted reading an interesting PR. Later, Xavier. Everyone is excited for BSN. Absolutely, everybody is excited for BSN. Okay, so this is good to go, except for the fact that there is an unused import up here. The Z index on children is weird, I feel like. I think this is a Z index issue. I think we can confirm that by doing something a little bit silly. So now that's 0 and this is 1. So we should always get one or the other. So now it's always the white ball with the black background. Like outline. It's really tough to see the outline that small, especially I'm sure on stream. Oh, as soon as I change the size of the window. Okay. So there's something going on here. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. Feels weird. Mesh and mesh material, right? With some alpha. Oh, I'm not even looking at the right thing. I'm not looking at the right thing at all. Where's the ball? There we go. I don't know why I did that. Transform from XYZ 0.0.1. So this hopefully will stay one way or the other. Clearly we needed to do it a bunch of times, so I'm just going to do it a couple of times. I do think that that was a Z indexing issue. So we're good. So now if I change this and I make this -1, we should always get the outline in front of the... Yeah. So that's exactly what happens. Cool. Z indexing issue solved. Can I do like... There's no 0 on this, right? I guess there's default. But there's no like with Z on it, I guess. This is fine. I would love to not have to... Why is my autocomplete messing up there? Yeah, we only get with translation. We don't have with Y. It's unfortunate. I feel like it would be cool. But reaching into that doesn't make a lot of sense, so we'll leave it as it is. Cool, and then I think we don't have anything in the background, right? This is just... I used to have a background in this game. But I don't think it was particularly helpful for any reason. Right, so now we just have clear color. So if we want that to be a brighter clear color, it can absolutely be a brighter clear color. Maybe we leave this at something a little bit lighter. I don't know. I don't think we really need to. 950 is fine. So this all works for 0.17. The 0.17 upgrades seem pretty smooth. Compared to some other updates in previous Bevy updates, things like massive rendering changes or something, 0.17 seems to be a very smooth upgrade. .17 push, cool. Alright, it's like 10:45. I'm feeling like I want to go eat some food, so I'm going to stop stream there. Thanks everyone for hanging out, and I will see you in the next one. Later.